Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a question that gets to the very core of our financial system.
All right, let's just get right into it, because this one's a real head-scratcher. You'd think that in a competitive market, you'd have some banks playing it safe, others being a bit more risky, right? A whole spectrum. But that's not what we see. In reality, pretty much every single bank follows the exact same high-risk, high-reward strategy. And the question is, why?
To get to the bottom of this, we first have to understand the specific kind of bet that banks are making. Let's call it the bank's gamble. It's the formula they all use to chase those huge profits.
It really boils down to this simple three-step playbook. First, they hold long-term assets. Think about stuff like 30-year mortgages. Second, they fund all of this with short-term liabilities. That's basically your deposits, money you can demand back at any second. And third, they pile on the leverage, using borrowed money to make their bets even bigger. Now, this recipe is absolutely fantastic for making money, but as we're about to see, it has a terrifying dark side.
Yeah, it's the classic double-edged sword, isn't it? On one side, it's an incredible machine for maximizing profits. But on the other, it creates this constant, terrifying risk of a complete and total collapse. It's like driving a Formula One car without a seatbelt. Incredible performance, but one wrong move, and it's all over.
Okay, so what happens when a bank makes that wrong move? What happens when it's staring into the abyss, suddenly running out of cash? Well, that brings us to the first layer of the official safety net, the liquidity rescue.
Let's paint a picture. Let's invent a bank. We'll call it Banco Alfa. So Banco Alfa makes a big, long-term mortgage loan. But then the person who got that loan moves the money to a different bank. All of a sudden, poof, the cash is gone. And now Banco Alfa owes that other bank money it just doesn't have on hand. It's illiquid. Now here's the crazy part. If you look at their books, Banco Alfa isn't actually broke. That mortgage it owns is still a valuable asset. The problem is timing. It's like owning a mansion but not having $5 in your pocket for a cup of coffee. The value's there, you just can't get to it fast enough to pay your bills. The bank is on the brink.
But right before everything goes completely south, in swoops the cavalry, the central bank. It acts as the lender of last resort. It basically just buys that illiquid mortgage from Banco Alfa, swapping it for cold, hard cash reserves.
And just like that, crisis averted. Banco Alfa is saved. It has the cash to pay its debts. But, and this is a huge but, take a really close look at what just happened on the balance sheets. The risk didn't just vanish into thin air. Nope, it was just moved from a private bank onto the public's books.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty neat trick, right? The bank is saved, the system is stable, everyone's happy. But this little rescue operation comes with a hidden cost, a really big one that affects every single one of us.
This whole process has a name, socialized risk. It's a fancy term for a simple and kind of scary idea. A private company's problem becomes society's problem. Their risk becomes our risk. And the way it happens is through the money in your wallet.
So here is the absolute crux of it. The central bank's money, the nation's currency, is now partially backed by that risky mortgage it just bought. If that mortgage goes bust, the central bank's assets take a hit, which can devalue the entire currency. So, the bailout isn't free. It gets paid for through the silent, sneaky tax of inflation.
But, a temporary cash crunch is one thing. What happens when the problem is way, way worse? Let's up the ante and talk about a bank that isn't just out of cash, but is fundamentally broke. What happens when the money disappears for good?
Let's go back to our friend Banco Alfa. But this time, it's a bloodbath. Let's say a huge chunk of their mortgages, 40%, have defaulted. They're worthless. Now the bank's assets are literally worth less than what it owes its depositors. It's not just illiquid, it is completely, fundamentally insolvent.
And this is what that looks like. It is ugly. Its assets have cratered to a value of 600, but it still owes 1,000 to its depositors. It's 400 in the hole. If nothing is done, those depositors are about to face massive, catastrophic losses.
To stop that kind of financial domino effect, an even bigger player has to come to the table. We're talking about the nation's treasury. This is the ultimate backstop, the final firewall designed to prevent a system-wide meltdown.
And the Treasury has a couple of pretty powerful tools in its belt. It can set up what's called a bad bank, which basically buys all the toxic junk assets for way more than they're actually worth. Poof, the balance sheet is magically fixed. Or it can do a capital injection, just pouring a boatload of new cash directly into the bank.
But where does all that money come from?
The Treasury doesn't just have a magic money tree. That massive hole it just created in its own finances has to be filled. And it gets filled by one thing: you, your future taxes. The loss has found its final home.
All right, so we've seen the rescue for a liquidity crisis and the rescue for an insolvency crisis. Now we can finally put all the pieces together and see how this creates the vicious cycle of risk.
Because when you have these massive, guaranteed government bailouts just waiting in the wings, it creates this incredibly powerful and frankly warped incentive. Economists call it moral hazard. It's a fancy way of saying, why should I play it safe when I know someone else is going to cover my losses if I fail?
This quote just nails it perfectly, doesn't it? When the risky bets pay off, the gains are privatized. They go straight to the bank's executives and shareholders. But when the bets go bad, the losses are socialized, passed on to all of us. It is the ultimate heads I win, tails you lose game.
And that's what locks the system into this endless, vicious cycle. Step 1. Banks take on enormous risks because that's how you make enormous profits. Step 2. When things inevitably blow up, the state steps in to rescue them. Step 3. The cost of that rescue gets dumped onto the public through inflation or taxes. And step 4. Well, knowing they have this safety net, the banks have every single reason to go right back to step 1 and do it all over again. That is why they all take the same gamble.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really tough question to chew on. The government tries to control all this with layers and layers of regulation. But if the very existence of the state-sponsored bailout is what fuels the entire cycle in the first place, can any amount of rules ever truly be enough to stop it? That is the billion or maybe trillion-dollar question.